Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here. I'd just like to thank our sponsors, Verizon, for the stage. It's been a great few days of content here, and we're finishing up with this fantastic panel. I'd like to thank our sponsors across the board as well for making ITW possible. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Brian Hale, who will be moderating the session. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. We are going to have a free-flowing and hopefully insightful conversation about the challenges the cybersecurity challenges that are facing so many folks that have attended ITW this year. More endpoints, more problems. That's the title. We're broadly going to be talking about 3 different categories. We're going to be talking about mitigating risk. We'll talk a little bit about technology trends, and then we'll wrap it up by talking about the role of shareholders and the role that they play in all this. But I am here with a distinguished panel. We have Jim, Luis, Brad, Yvonne, and Terrence. And before we get started, I'm going to ask them to describe their title, their role, a little bit about their organization, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Hey, Jim.
All right, thank you, Brian. My name is Jim Ricotta, and I'm the CEO of Alero Quantum. We're a software company, and we build a complete software stack for implementing quantum networks at a commercial scale. And we're involved in some very exciting quantum network projects that are underway here in the US as well as in Canada.
Perfect. Good morning, I guess. My name is Louis Fiallo, and I'm the Vice President for the Americas region for China Telecom Americas. We've been in the US for 21 years, and we actually help international companies get to China and Asia, and obviously we also help Asian companies and Chinese companies come to the Americas. So we're, in our parent company, through a lot of investments, I would consider one of the leaders in the areas of providing IoT type of services, which I'll share later today. Thank you for having me.
Welcome everyone, Brad Lutz from GTT. We're a managed services, managed security provider for the enterprise. We have a global IP network that is a tier 1 IP network. I run the supplier management and business operations group globally for them.
Hi, morning. Ivan Sierra. I'm from Micro AI. We are based out of Dallas, Texas. And we are a full service orchestration company focusing on smart connectivity for the deployment of many use cases using artificial intelligence and machine learning, particular security, cybersecurity related use cases for many industries, including telecommunications.
And you have Terrence Robinson here with Verizon on the wholesale side of the house. And so I have wireless services, IoT, as well as above the network solutions. You think about SaaS, cybersecurity. And I've been with Verizon for over 25 years. They start us young. And, and so with that, about half of that time I've spent on the cybersecurity side. So mobile security, managed security services, people, process technology, et cetera.
Well, thanks, gentlemen, for that information. Terrence and I had the opportunity to be on a panel last year, so we're going to see how much has changed. I will tell you, it's no surprise to everybody here that the amount of data breaches in the space continues to be frankly, potentially an alarming trend. It continues. There's a lot of weaknesses. I'm saying this from a cybersecurity perspective, right? We have seen reports earlier this year from at least one intelligence cybersecurity firm, Cyble, that basically estimated at the first half of the first quarter of the year that 74 million US telecom customers have had their data exposed and provided on the dark web. Most of you folks here in this room shouldn't be a surprise, but in every one of those attacks that Cyble cited, that was through a third party. There's obviously the pressure to continue to provide customers the best business lines and services possible, so you're going to have that bringing online new vendors, you're going to have people dropping off, and that creates, obviously, a lot of cybersecurity risks. So we're going to start off, as I said before, talking about mitigating risks. And so I think my first question I'm going to address to Yvonne. So look, there's a whole series of risks. Yvonne, in your case, what do you think organizations can do to mitigate specifically against financial reputational risks posed by cyber incidents? And if you guys on the panel, as well as I go down the line, we might talk a little bit more in detail about DDoS, zero-day, and cybersecurity threats more broadly. But Yvonne, what should they be? What can they do initially?
I think the first thing is recognizing that you need to use all the tools out there to protect yourself. So there is network security, but there's also endpoint security, and the two are not the same, right? There's no one tool, one technology, one product that is going to protect you from all angles. So the companies need to work on defense in depth. It's called defense in depth. It's kind of like an architecture that allows you to protect everything from your network, which is basically what is traversing through the different endpoints within your network, as well as edge endpoints, which are those new types of devices that are being deployed by the billions now that are getting connected to the network. So IoT devices, smart sensors, mobile phones, all types of equipment, right? And you need to be able to protect those as well as part of your whole security apparatus, right? And you can use AI and machine learning to do that. For those type of devices, there are certain requirements. They normally have lower processing capacity, so they need something that is lightweight, right? They usually don't have a huge connectivity capacity to be able to send large amounts of data up and down to the cloud for analysis and processing. So you need something that can be deployed locally, that can infer locally, that you can get insights, that you can deeply observe the behavior of that endpoint device locally, and then receive alarms and alerts and take remediation actions when something anomalous happens, while also understanding the root cause of that analysis. So it's creating a very comprehensive package of different points of security deployments. Some might be overlapping, but it's kind of the analogy of, you live in a house, there's crime in the neighborhood, right? Who is going to be less likely to be attacked? The guy that only has an alarm, or the guy that has an alarm and dogs and a fence? That's basically the aim at this point, with all the increase in two things: the increase in attacks from criminals into the different networks, and also the proliferation of devices that have escalated over the last few years with the advent of all these connected IoT devices. And companies cannot leave this to the end user. That is a big mistake. Companies need to take the proactive approach of providing that security to their end users without making the end user responsible for protecting their device.
So holistic, layered, and making sure that the end user, it's not all on the end user. So,
yeah, there will be end users that will be, keen to protect their devices and be responsible enough. But again, they don't feel it's their responsibility. And ultimately, if the end user device gets hacked or, has some kind of security concern, there might be some issues for the end user. But if that same device is used to penetrate a corporate network, there will be significantly more issues and more costly issues for the company that is providing that connectivity.
So Terrence, your take, we were talking a little bit about the different risks, but we also were talking about old school DDoS, some of the keeps coming back, right? It's never gone away, I should say. thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start with a commercial, so forgive me. I'll talk a little bit about our data breach investigative report. So we do an annual publication. As a matter of fact, the 2023 should be released in a couple of weeks in June. And so what we look at the threat landscape. And so what we look at, different indicators of compromise. We look at incidents. We look at actual breaches, right? So in the last year's report, there was about 24,000, actually a little bit under 24,000 when you think about incidents, and then about 5,000 breaches. And so we have different entities that actually provide to that, about 87 different contributors on a global scale, right? So we look at DDoS, to your point. So with DDoS, we saw about almost half of all of the incidents were DDoS, so about 45%, right? And what's interesting with DDoS is we've seen it evolve, because initially it was just hacktivists, just kind of making a disruption, but now we've seen it monetized. And so with that, we'll see DDoS attacks that are successful. They'll go back to that entity and say, hey, you need to pay us Bitcoin, Monero, cash, whatever it may be, X date, or we're gonna hit you again. And then also we've seen it from a diversion standpoint. So perhaps you'll see a DDoS attack to get attention in one direction when you're maybe trying to do a breach and exfiltrate data. So from a protection standpoint, the good news is that this can be, you can mitigate relatively easily. As long as you're proactive, you're working with the right entity that has the capacity to do volumetric attacks. Of course, we can do that from a Verizon standpoint. But then also when you look at being able to detect anomaly detection and doing those elements well, so having the right partner in place. And then the other thing I'll kind of throw in that we've seen too within our data breach investigative report, about 82% of all breaches, so not incidents like DDoS, but actual breaches, exfiltration of data, involve the human element. So you think about remote workers. So we've seen remote workers being attacked relentlessly. And in most instances, they're just trying to get credentials. Once you get credentials, you're off to the races. So what we really say, I'll keep it simple. We talk about just basic security hygiene, so multi-factor authentication. Because the last couple of really large breaches, when forensics was done, it was primarily due to not having multi-factor authentication in place. So it's just having that basic knowledge and just putting some of the basic parameters in place, and it can mitigate a lot of still the tried and true methods that we're seeing.
And we still see the multi-factor authentication as well, being as a vector as well. So
Yep.
you can do all the right things in some ways, but again, very, the cyber criminals are not sitting on their laurels, right? They're sophisticated, a lot of them, and they're looking at different ways to take advantage. Brad, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that both these guys said. Terrence is trying to engineer the human out of the supply chain, solve all the problems there. But picking up on that end user, as a managed security provider, one of the things you have to care for is your own shop, right? You can't be the shoemaker with, the shoemaker's kids with holes in your shoes. And one of the things we focus on is a relentless training program, just making the user more intelligent, making them focused on data hygiene. Yes, you need to do what Ivan said and protect, don't rely on the user, but the more you can cycle that user through regular training, if there's a breach, do it again, and really monitor who's responsible for clicking the link, even if it's a false link that you're sending out just to police. Run them through training again, make the user more intelligent about data hygiene, more aware for phishing and smishing.
And some of that's cadence, right? If you have security awareness training, you might think, oh, once a year is enough, and it may be, depending on your organization, right? Yeah. But there's so many different, the cyber criminals are using so many different types of techniques and evolving all the time that when we see a regular security awareness training that's done in a more sort of maybe a quarterly lunch and learn even, that's actually very helpful for people to see and know what type of trends are happening, so they know what to look out for. Also, sometimes you'll have organizations, and I'll be interested to get your thoughts on this, of individuals. You have people rolling on and rolling off, and making sure that all the steps are taken there, right, for that. Luis, what are you seeing? What are the risks that you're seeing the most, and what are you doing to mitigate them at China Telecom Americas?
Yeah, so China Telecom, our parent company in China today, we have a very large infrastructure that we call Wing 5.0. We have two parts of it. One is the basic IoT communications that's required, and today we have over 200 users and out of those 200 users, 200 million users, I'm sorry. I'm used to talking in China, everything's million or billion, right? So we have 200 million users using IoT to get access our IoT platform for just IoT basic sensory type of communications. And that's connecting to 60 million devices, okay? Then we also have another part of our company on the same platform that actually gets into what we call artificial or AI IoT. And that part of it, we have 400 million users and with accessing 130,000 apps around there. The reason I share this with you is because the problem that we've actually had to solve is something that began years ago. If you guys remember back in 2008, the Beijing Olympics, China Telecom was responsible for providing a lot of the security and a lot of the management of flow, through the Beijing Olympics. So we started deploying devices, IoT devices at that time. And then as the country, because it's a large country with a lot of people, we have had to go out and make sure that we can actually help facilitate the transportation, communications, and so forth. So for us, Wing 5.0 is a platform that we built, and it's really comprised of two major parts. One, our edge, which is really our wireless network, and then the other one is a private cloud network where you can actually run your applications, and we give you limited access to those applications to the device. So as long as your device is compatible with the China Telecom wireless network, you can bring it on. We also provide certifications. So if you want to be able to be certified on our platform, we do that. What's unique about what maybe not unique, what we're doing and pushing to address security is that we actually have a lab where your devices go through and we actually test it and make sure it's done. The problem with that is that you don't control all the devices all the time, right? And as a carrier, we've always been used to, hey, you're going to give you a limited set of capabilities. Now things are being exposed open. So what we did is partitioned our network to be able to separate out from our core wireless network to our IoT platform. And then we also built, through our cloud infrastructure, another platform that's just designed for what you're actually supposed to do, so that your privileges are very limited. And that's also embedded with our our IP network and our SD-WAN network that we have deployed around the world, so to being able to access things. So that's how we've done it. And for us, it's an ecosystem, not just looking at the solutions, and because we manage so many of these devices today.
Did you, so I guess I should go to Jim now and just ask him about sort of, we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges. What are the concerning emerging challenges that lay ahead and kind of frame out the landscape, and what do you think what are you most concerned about, and what should we be doing about it?
Sure. So there's a new threat that security professionals became aware of starting about a year ago. It's called Q-Day. And if you Google Q-Day, the definition will pop right to the top, and the Q stands for quantum. And Q-Day is the day or the point where quantum computers, a quantum computer will be powerful enough, big enough, and accurate enough to break the algorithms, the public key cryptography algorithms that are commonly used, like RSA and Diffie-Hellman, ECC. And I think many of you know these are the PKI is used for key exchange in everything from e-commerce to online banking to secure communications, even by the organizations that require the highest security. Some of the ones that are based right around here in Washington. And the reason that it's known that a quantum computer will eventually break those algorithms is that a quantum program or algorithm was developed more than 20 years ago called Shor's algorithm, which can very efficiently, with a quantum computer, break the prime factorization that lies underneath most of these algorithms. So Q-Day is something that CISOs are preparing for. There's basically a couple different options to mitigate the quantum attack. One is to use some new math algorithms that are being developed and standardized. These are typically referred to as, the family of them are called PQC, post-quantum cryptography. And then another option is to use a quantum network to address Q-Day by using quantum entanglement itself to exchange keys. And the benefit of that approach is you're never sending the key out over the fiber. There's no man in the middle that's possible. So there's going to be a lot of activity both among service providers as well as among enterprises who have a strong need for secure communication to put mitigations in place for this coming Q-Day. The thing that's different about Q-Day from Y2K is we knew what the date was, right? We don't know what the date is for Q-Day. And if you talk to the people that Aliro talks to in some of the government agencies, they'll say, you know, if a nation state developed a quantum computer like this, they wouldn't put out a press release about it, right?
So Brad, jumping in here, your thoughts about whether you want to talk about Q-Day, quantum, or just other emerging trends we should be looking out for.
Yeah, so I think I'm glad he brought up Q-Day. I think if you read some of the press, we have time, but I think a related action could be to steal encrypted data now and hold it and wait for Q-Day. And so there's actions that need to be taken by the enterprise now. One of the other things we're focused on is the sort of untethered use of ChatGPT and other AI engines. We've had clients that approached us on ways to block access to these websites, these engines, because their technicians are downloading scripts and introducing them into their network, and the enterprise doesn't yet know how to approach these things. So our recommendation is that you just block them across the board and then start to open it up more slowly. But the underlying technologies are not there yet to do that effectively.
Well, that's been the scramble, right? To whether to block these ChatGPT, BARD, and others. Even seeing different organizations put out use guidance for ChatGPT. There's the whole series of legal, ethical. There's a whole series of concerns. There's security concerns there. So we see people kind of catching up and scrambling on that. Terrence, what about you? What's your take?
Yeah, I'll take it in a little bit of a different direction as well, because a lot of times, organizations, everyone's thinking about, data exfiltration, but I would just say data leakage is another real area of concern, and a lot of organizations just don't have their arms around it. I'll kind of give you a couple of quick examples, because you think about shadow IT, right? And with remote workers, we're continuing to see that kind of expand, and even SaaS, because most organizations, you're talking about hundreds of applications for large enterprise, thousands that they don't really have their arms around. So cloud posture, security management, how are you doing that? How are you approaching the configuration? Do you have your arms around how many applications are being used by your workforce? But then the other piece, and I'll fall on the sword and say I've done this, I know everyone else has done this as well, but you download an application, you're just trying to get it up and running on your device, you're not reading a EULA, you're just saying okay, okay, okay. You don't know what you've enabled on that device. When you think about access to your microphone, to your camera, to your contacts, et cetera. So there's just some of those elements that, and it's not necessarily malicious in scope, but what it could be is just unauthorized data to a third party that organizations have to think about. And so there's actually quite a few ways that we're saying when you think about posture management, also we're seeing like in the EDR, in the XDR space, more visibility in regards to what's happening across all assets, because mobile assets in particular is really kind of the last thing to be looked at, and that data leakage could lead to more sophisticated attacks.
So before we close out the mitigating the risk, we're talking a lot about third-party exposure, right? There's what we think we know, right, and what we think we can control from where we sit, right? You have vendors rolling on, you have vendors coming on, coming off, a whole series of different things, and we'll probably get into a little bit more detail on that. But before we move on, anyone want to address third party as far as mitigating risk steps that you feel like you've taken, or I don't know, Luis, you want to start, or Ravon and then Luis? Yeah.
All right. So for us, we look at the world. The world is changing quickly, right? You have some very large telecom operators up here. And, the world of our world is not going to be, hey, you got to let me know everything, who you are and everything else like that. because your phones may be compromised, may be taken, and we give you the privileges to get access to our wireless network, to our fixed line internet networks, right? Okay, we don't know that, right? So what you have to do is what we've done, and I think we've done it because of the scale that we've had to build, is really create a world of whitelisting where things are permitted on, okay? And then we give you privileges. Those privileges are tied to what you're buying. So for example, in our world, right, if you're running an application on our platform, okay, you're gonna be running it based on certain parameters of how much bandwidth you signed up for. So all of a sudden you're going from a narrowband IoT application pushing 180K to all of a sudden something like a couple megs of traffic. We know something's going on, all right? So these are the things that we've actually started going into, but it's really, what perplexed me most is that it requires a lot of education, because our network engineers know how to do this on our network, but our customers who want to deploy this stuff, if it's for Industry 4.0, smart agriculture, whatever it is, they have no clue. So we have to spend a lot of time, and I think over time we'll come up with more names, we'll come up with more process to be able to vet out things, but the world that we're doing is not going to change. It's not going back. So we have to just be at the forefront and continue to educate not only inside but outside to our customers.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think companies need to focus on protecting the edge and the endpoint, and a lot of them are down the road of zero trust policies and zero trust architecture. And to play on a very famous political phrase, you have to not trust anything and verify everything. And I think that's the way to go. Also, deployment of more agnostic solutions. When you use something like AI or machine learning to have deep observability of a particular endpoint, from the standpoint of it doesn't matter what the virus signature is, it doesn't matter what type of threat it is, I am going to tell you that there's something wrong with this device, because the AI agent is going to learn from the normal behavior of that device over a training period, and then it's going to infer on what is not normal for this device in terms of behavior from all the different steps of the kill chain. Is somebody sniffing the ports? Is somebody trying to download a payload? Has there been a change of credential? This device normally sends no more than 1 megabytes in terms of data files. Now it's downloading 50 megabytes. Anything that is abnormal behavior and that has a particular root cause needs to be communicated immediately to the company or the team offering the protection for the network or for the device. And remediation actions can actually be, in some cases, automated, or in other cases, there needs to be a review by a certain team that then decides on what the specific action for that type of behavior is. But again, we go to the point of you need to deploy all the tools that are out there in order to make a strong case for network protection, and that protection needs to go all the way to the edge now. The edge has been the last thing in people's minds. Everybody thinks that because you have all the firewalls and all the tools deployed at your data center, your network is going to be fine, when actually your weakest link is the one that the humans control.
Brad.
Just to pick up on that, the way we think about this is exactly that. You have to protect the edge. As an MSSP, your enterprise client is going to hold you responsible for that full supply chain. So you do need to be in the never trust, always verify. And when you're onboarding new suppliers into the ecosystem, the obligation to do the diligence on their own security posture is really strong sitting in our seats now.
I think that's exactly right, and people obviously have learned the hard way, but there is more of it, like you said, a demand to ensure that those steps are taken to vet and to ensure the proper cybersecurity is applied to vendors throughout the third parties. Okay, we're going to move into technology trends. We've mentioned AI, ChatGPT, Bard, and others, but we talked a little bit about quantum. So let's go to Jim. So there's a lot of promise here, right? What are the trends you're seeing regarding technology related, specifically to telecom, and maybe from the quantum perspective? What's the promise there?
Yeah, I think you know, I've been in quantum networking for almost 4 years now, and when you say quantum to people, you know, in an enterprise or in a service provider, they immediately, their mind jumps to, you know, very exotic machines that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and are very flaky. And what's interesting is quantum communications and networking is a lot different from quantum computing, and it's a lot closer to commercial viability. And here are some of the reasons. So with quantum networking and communications, we deal with photons. These are room temperature qubits that you can create by the millions per second using off-the-shelf lasers. And these qubits travel down the fiber from me to you on the same fibers that telecom carriers have been using, you know, for decades. We don't need these qubits to maintain their state for very long, which is the big problem with quantum computers, because we're going to exchange qubits and then we're going to use them to transfer information, and then we're going to do that again and again and again. We have, there's a commercial quantum network in the US. It's launched, it's in Tennessee. The service provider is called EPB. Aliro is providing the software. And there's one in Canada, in Quebec, it's called Sherbrooke Quantum. And there's others springing up all around the country. If you look at a map of North America and you identify the quantum, the metropolitan area quantum networks that are in the ground or being planned in this year, it looks like ARPANET from 1980. So I think quantum communications is something you should really look into, because the use case is secure communications. We talked about the threats, and this technology is ready to be commercialized.
How about Terrence, Yvonne? You guys, thoughts, Terrence?
Yeah, absolutely. And for us, what we've really looked at is how can we lean into our core competencies, right? So you think about us being a network services provider, but then also we're a managed security provider as well. And so you look at some of the orchestration tools, the management tools that can be made available. So something we've been working on for years, we're continuing to aggressively invest, is around network as a service. So what we essentially want to be able to do is offer one contract per site based on the outcome. So let's say I'm looking to have very high availability. I want 100% SLA. What does that look like, from a network perspective? Would that be private IP, internet dedicated services, as well as from a redundancy standpoint? Am I doing dual circuits? Am I diversity from a CPE perspective? And then really wrapping the right SLAs, and also having NOC and SOC lifecycle management with that. And then later this month, actually, we're going to be introducing, because I think someone up here mentioned around technology and vendor agnostic solutions. So we're moving in that direction from an advanced SASE standpoint. So we want to be able to be technology and vendor agnostic as it relates to SD-WAN, SWIG, you think about CASB as well as ZTNA, and kind of going on that journey. We're continuing to build out that ecosystem. But then the other thing, and we kind of talked about this, Brad, the other day a little bit, is something we refer to as secure hybrid networks. And so with Shine, what we do is we actually have POPs across the globe. Any network, so network agnostic, can connect into those POPs, and you're not actually traversing the internet, you're hitting our backbone, but then we're also integrating security. So from a UTM, Unified Threat Management standpoint, we can do elements of SD-WAN when you think about application routing, but then we can also do elements of SASE. So we're really looking at how can we start to integrate segment networks, take out some of the complexity, and move in that direction. And from a mobile standpoint, we've been doing a lot of these services for well over 10 years. You think about mobile private networks, we've been doing NNIs to MPLS networks, to old school FES connections, as well as point-to-point VPNs, and really segmenting the traffic. So now we're trying to expand that across other networks as well. So that's an area we're investing in, and we're excited about the possibilities. We're getting a lot of good feedback, frankly, from the market.
Does anyone else want to jump in before we get a little bit into AI and ML? Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about sort of, AI, ML have been around, right? We know this. Obviously, there's been a lot of sort of public discourse, congressional hearings, a lot going on right now on the policy side as people are sort of catching up to some of the technology that's already been leveraged for some time. So like, maybe Yvonne, maybe you can lay out what the future of the telecommunications industry looks like as AI and ML continues to expand, and then maybe Luis and Terrence, you guys jump in, and
Sure.
Jim, Brad.
Yeah, I think we need to make a distinction here, because the sexy thing going around is chat GPT and all these things. That's conversational AI, right? There's a huge aspect of machine AI, which is what I'm actually speaking here of, which goes into your device, into your connected device. Everything nowadays is a connected device. So everything has the possibility to either be infected itself, or through that infection, actually compromise a network. We're not islands anymore. You know, your TV, your mobile devices, your IoT devices, anything as simple as a smart meter in your home that is connected. If you have an electric car, your charger that you have on your wall at home in your garage, that's a connected device. So all of these devices need to be protected. They are all machines. They have nothing to do with conversational AI, but they are connected to some network somewhere through the internet, via Wi-Fi, via 5G, whatever the case is, right? So where we're going is, and this is part of, you know, there's not one solution, as we mentioned before. There's not one architecture. There's not one product that is going to give you all that. It's going to be a combination of products and strategies. So where do you go from there? Well, the first thing is understanding the challenges and pain points. So for us, for instance, from an AI ML standpoint, we don't have a prepackaged solution. You know, you're not selling, you know, Windows 2000. You need to understand first what are the customer challenges, and then determine how AI and machine learning it's going to help with overcoming those challenges, right? And you need to take care of every device, even very, you know, low processing power devices, where a lot of solutions cannot be deployed because they are resource constrained, need to be protected. Why? Because they're connected. That's the reason why. Anything that is connected is a potential point of failure in terms of your cybersecurity strategy.
Luis.
I agree with everything Ivan just said. You know, let me share with you a couple projects that we're working on without giving you the details of who it is. But there's a car manufacturer today in Brazil that we are helping them automate their factory. And one of the things that they're looking to do is take advantage of artificial intelligence, actually really machine learning from my perspective, where they're going to teach these robots or this through software to be able to do certain components of the production process, okay? And what they've asked us to do, remember, we're telco, right? We're historically a telecommunications company. What they've asked us to do, not only help them with the components that we're going to put in place there, but also being able to integrate it into our network. And this network is not a national network. And in Brazil, we're an ISP, okay? So now we're extending this problem that we're trying to solve to the internet, where, you know, we're dependent a lot on other local providers, okay? And being able to do this as well as part of their campus, where we're going to be using some of their own wireless technology that they've deployed there, okay? So the complexity of going after artificial and providing support for machine learning type initiatives, artificial intelligence initiatives, is getting much more complicated and further away from where we came from. Because in the past, we tell you what phones you can use, what tablets you can use, are certified on our platform, and that's what you do, okay? We're going now, we're never going to be a wireless provider in Brazil. So we're now having to learn about the Brazilian operators and how they're doing it and because at the same time the conversation goes that the customer wants security. They want to make sure, and more importantly, because the information, they're going away from a human to making a decision type of algorithm making a decision, and that information is flying really fast. And they can't afford to have things go on their production line, cause problems. So these level of complexities, I get geeked over. I get really excited about because it's the future. But the reality also, I think back and I go, oh my God, this could be a liability issue for me. It could cause a lot of problems. But this is the world we're doing. This is what we're seeing. And we're seeing more and more of that every day. And I encourage you, I walked around before the show, or before this session, there's some young companies over there that are going to probably have a seat here in the future. So, that's where we're at right now for innovation.
Just picking up again on a couple of the themes there, the way we talk about understanding the clients at that site, that application, what are they running from there? We talk about it as use cases, and we used to talk about it as use cases to deploy the right connectivity solution. And now we're talking about use cases to ensure we know what they're doing with AI and machine learning there so we can deploy the right security stack. So this is where I get my little commercial in. GTT's award-winning Secure Connect SD-WAN product, there's a security stack, and what you enable on it is it's critical to understand the use case so you know what you need to enable on that security stack so that they're productive, they can use the AI that they need to use there, but the edge is protected, they can securely access the applications in the cloud.
And I'll pick up on the commercial piece too. I'll kind of get in a little bit of a shameless plug, but when we look at our core competency, I mean, you think about Verizon, we're a network services provider, so we're seeing billions of events on our network. So you think about the data sets, we know what normal traffic, what good looks like. We know attack signatures, indicators of compromise. So we look at network anomaly detection. And so there's definitely an opportunity there. We're putting a lot of investment in that area because we see it, frankly. And it really, it helps us, one, in regards to us just protecting our own infrastructure, but then we also look at it in service offerings as well. So what can we do as it relates to DDoS detection? You don't want a black hole, clean traffic. So you want to make sure that you're doing that with a high level of efficacy, that you're not doing false positives. So this is something that's critically important to us. Also, even when you think about like TIP platforms, so threat intelligence platforms, also incident response. So it's an area where we're doing investments because we see a direct value, not only what we present to our customers from our product offerings, but then also what we do within our network and how we can kind of try to mitigate risk.
Before we close out our technology trends section of the discussion, I want to ask Jim the last question here about quantum. Again, we talked about promise. We talked about its ability to revolutionize our approach to data security. What are your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, so quantum networking is completely different from the classical networking that we all, have experienced in our careers. And when you talk about security, the security that we use is all based on math, right? Different algorithms like RSA and Diffie-Hellman and AES, if you want to talk about symmetric encryption. But what you can do with quantum is add a layer of physical security. And we all on this panel have talked about the importance of defense in depth or layered defense. No CISO relies on just one thing to keep out threats. So what quantum can do that no classical networking product can do is add a layer of physics-based security. And what I mean by that is using quantum physics, specifically the property of entanglement, to prevent someone from intercepting your communication. That doesn't mean you should abandon the math-based security. Again, layered defense, you probably want to use new kinds of math algorithms like the post-quantum ones, but you can also add this physical layer of security, which, like most new security solutions, it's going to be the very top of the pyramid, those that need the most secure networks. It's not a coincidence that Q-Day became a well-known term a year ago because of a memo from the NSA, the US NSA, that said, it's called National Security Memo 10, if you want to look it up, that said this is a real threat and you have to do something about it. So quantum security will start at the top, in government and in financial services, but I think over time it will move more into every service provider is going to want to offer that extra level of security to their enterprise clients.
So moving into the role of our stakeholders, right? So I'm going to start with a question about, almost every corporation, large organization doing business at some point will be part of a merger or an acquisition. There's a lot to consider when you're talking about acquiring a company or integrating with regard to security. So what's the role of stakeholders when it comes to mandating cybersecurity in that space, in the acquisition, integration, merger space? So maybe we'll start off here with Yvonne. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or Terrence.
I think it needs to be considered as part of the investment considerations or purchase considerations, because the liabilities are huge. And we have seen horror stories of not only monetary losses, and some of those monetary losses will not be seen for years because of reputational losses. So you erode the reputation of a corporation because they have been subject to a specific attack, because they were not protected enough, because they were trying to cut corners of save money, and then over time, that reputation is eroded. People move away from that business, and somebody that make an investment now might be seeing negative results in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years because of that action that took place maybe before they invested, or maybe at the time they invested. So I think it needs to be certainly part of any type of purchase or investment strategy, not only for newcomers, but also it should be demanded by existing shareholders as well. Because ultimately, things are driven by either dividends or stock price, and if those are affected because of security problems, then the pockets of those shareholders are the ones that are affected. And that falls on management, because they're supposed to be doing what's best for that corporation and safeguarding those shareholders.
Brad.
Yeah, it ties to the first question around reputational and brand damage, but it should, if it has not already, rise to the level. Everybody pays a lot of money to run a quality of earnings check before an acquisition. Certainly in our space, what they should be doing, and this I would think would be true in any enterprise space, is quality of security check, right? And it needs to rise to that level, and I think it will.
Terrence.
Yeah, and I'd even say from our perspective, and we're seeing it a lot with enterprises now, is how can we help them when you think about removing friction, removing complexity when they're bringing in an acquisition, a new entity. So in many instances, we'll look at services from a segmentation standpoint associated with traffic. We'll look at even standing up SOCs temporarily, runbooks, playbooks, kind of helping them navigate that. But the other piece, too, that's kind of interesting is when you think about staffing in general, and this is something we struggle with as well, do you have the right qualified staff from a security standpoint? Because you think about specialized, like let's say you're looking for a reverse malware engineer. Most people don't necessarily have that on their roster. And so with us being a network service provider, managed security provider, we can challenge those employees. We can hold on to some of that talent. When you think about us being able to have someone be involved with threat research, maybe they're involved in incident response, our internal NOCs and SOCs, our external converged SOCs, advanced SOCs. So we can have them do a lot of different roles and rotate, because because a lot of partners who work with us, they don't necessarily just want security. They're also looking for, how we can augment what they're doing. And so staff augmentation and coming in and helping them navigate. So in a lot of ways, we want to be able to help in mitigating some of that risk and navigating the acquisition space.
You talked about talent, right? Do they have the right talent on board? Does it match the needs of the business to secure the business? What do you think is important? All of you guys, have a role in cybersecurity, and so maybe Luis, you could talk about what do you think?
For me, I would want to avoid the stakeholders. So as an executive of my company, we take it very seriously, the whole area of cybersecurity and the investment that we've done. That we're trying to be, the highest levels possible in this area, right? But for us, the reputational damage and that you have from an incident is tremendous. So you don't want to wait to have this conversation with your your board members or even a shareholder, because that's just going to be a bad conversation. Because I think in their minds, as the operators, we should be doing this. We should be figuring out how to protect the company, educate our employees, making sure we have safeguards from our customers accessing our network across the board in the different capacities that they have, and the growing number of different capacities that we're giving them. So all these things, when it comes to security, unfortunately, it's just the way we live in today. You know, it's a paramount more than anything else.
So it creates opportunity as well for providers like us or outside third parties. If you take it to the enterprise space, the likelihood that they're going to have the necessary expertise to diligence themselves, they should be doing their self-assessments, they should be doing their training, their rolling audits, but the likelihood that they're going to have the necessary and sufficient talent in-house to do this right is pretty low.
Absolutely.
So that creates space for managed security providers, but also outside third parties and consultants to really feed into that net benefit, but also business opportunity.
Yeah, I would say use tools like AI and ML to automate as much as possible and leave only critical tasks to humans. Sometimes you might have either not the right expertise or overwhelmed staff because they're taking care of all kinds of potential threats that could actually be taken care of by implementing a sound AI-based strategy.
All right, so before we go to the Q&A, I want to ask, this is as a former television producer, I always ask this at the end of every interview I ever did. Is there something we've left out? Is there something that we want to make sure that folks walk away with today from our discussion? Terrence?
Yeah, I'll start with that because I think and it kind of goes on the theme that we were just talking about as it relates to the employees, because I think one area you think about, and we've joked about this, Brad, with the end users. The end users, in a lot of ways, they pose the greatest risk for an organization, but then also I can say they could be a great asset as far as being that final firewall. And what's critical is you have to build a culture where cybersecurity matters. And that's something within Verizon, we have a heavy emphasis on that, because you can have the best technology, the most sophisticated cybersecurity technology, but if you don't have a culture where your employees actually care, it's really going to be a losing battle. And so you start thinking of things like the acceptable use policies. You think about other elements in regards to training, as we kind of talked about before. Also, even self-remediation in some instances as it relates to endpoints. So,
I'm going to pass this on, you guys.
Okay.
I have an issue.
So
I need to
very
take
important
over.
around the end user. Yes.
Sorry. Excuse me.
Just picking up on what Terrence was saying, the end user, that's the weak point. Sure. The sort of wetware is the weak point, so creating that culture where they believe it matters. But one of the things we haven't touched on that sort of reiterates that and makes it more serious is the regulatory environment.
Yeah,
I know GTT, we're subject to Team Telecom overview. So getting employees to understand that this is not overkill by the CISO, that there are real consequences to any slip up by us, both to the brand, but also in this regulatory environment, there's very real penalties associated with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. If we've got any questions from the audience, we'll take them now while Brian pops out and pops back in really quickly. So if anyone has any questions for the panel, just pop your hand up and we can go from there.
So you guys were mentioning that, we've been moving from a network driven by sites and connection to a network now driven by application and users. So, we have to adapt to what's happening in the overlay here, in the underlay of the telco providers, providing connection. Again, you mentioned, I think, Luis, you mentioned that you're becoming really an integrator, basically, putting things together from other providers, plus, ISPs, wireless, and so on. So how do you guys, being a telco provider, historically a telco provider, how do you face the competition of do-it-yourself? Customers are now becoming wizards. They want to do everything themselves. They want to, to integrate and become actually an integrator. So we're kind of forced as a telco provider to become a digital integrator in this world. But I think today our main competition is the do-it-yourself. So what is the value add of telco providers in this land? How can we, or how can you differentiate yourself and, on that.
I'll actually start with that, and I'll be kind of curious of other thoughts. But the way we look at it is, like, SASE is a great example. So you start to think about these solutions that are not just a single vendor solution. In most instances, you're talking about multiple vendors. So how do you really go about orchestrating that in the right way? And so in many instances, when you think about a carrier like ourselves, we're working with so many different, software, providers, and we're working with so many different protocols, et cetera, that we're sitting in a pretty good position to be able to do a lot of that orchestration and remove a lot of that complexity. So that's really where we see a lot of value. And then kind of going back to some of the previous comments Brad and others had is that you think about also the skill sets that we have, because a lot of organizations, it's not their core competency as it relates to security. So can you even hold the right employees and keep them on board and staffed? And so in our space, we can challenge them, rotate them. So we look at just being able to bring the right resources and helping from an orchestration perspective. And we've seen that be a differentiator, to be quite honest.
I really like that question, so let me address it. We're in the middle of doing a lot of things in South America, okay? And predominantly, we've always been like a managed service provider or an ISP down there. But some of our customers are, provided services through our parent company, right? And they're extending their manufacturing or their investments into, solar panels and all these other things. They want to have the same capabilities, okay? So when we go into a country where we don't have the underlying infrastructure, we have to build the overlay infrastructure that's going to allow us to give similar capabilities, and we partition. So the alternative is for us is that in those countries, we may use the provider's edge wireless network to our advantage and for our customers' purpose. But what we're actually then doing is using our own cloud and our own technologies to be able to integrate that communication and still build out a privileged access infrastructure for them to be able to utilize these endpoints, okay? And that's how we're doing it. And it's funny because I think, Terrence and I were talking about this today, just before the meeting. We have a lot of things like that we want to work with Verizon, okay? I just saw the lady from TELUS leave. Today we do a lot in Canada with TELUS. So I think the world, and also the one thing to keep in mind is that the deployment and the rules, the regulations and the laws for, selling SIM cards or utilizing external country SIM cards in the country is different by country. So you have to go through and understand a tremendous amount of things. But this is, as Brad mentioned, this is a new opportunity also as a telco to start generating new revenues that you maybe didn't do before, So I think it's a good opportunity.
A revenue that we lost, I talk as a telco provider as well, from MPLS, that all that great money that we used to get from MPLS is gone now to internet. So I think we need to sell 5 times more internet to recover the revenue of MPLS. And indeed, and we're forced to become a digital integrator. That's the world that we're living in. But again, personally, I see a lot of OEM, competing with us and going directly to customer and say, hey, you guys can do it yourself. You don't even need those telco providers. We can show you how, and you can have the skills to manage it. So that's, I think, one of the biggest competition we're facing as well nowadays. So, thank you. Thank you for the
OEM guys are, the alternative providers, they're good, and they actually have a role. And actually, the challenge for us is to go get a relationship in place with them, because I think, there's too many things happening. We had quantum on this side. We had a whole bunch of stuff of artificial intelligence on that side. You can't solve those things, and you can't hire enough people to solve all those things. So you need to depend on different people and build an ecosystem that's going to work.
Thank you.
What'd I miss? That was a first.
We solved the problem.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that. I knew you guys could handle it. Sorry about that.